My brother decided that my house was his new trophy, and I was just decoration in his winning life. He sat there smirking, as if he'd just hit the jackpot, completely clueless about the disaster I was setting up for him. Little did he know, his triumph would turn into his biggest downfall. But let's start from the beginning. My name is Ben, I'm 27, and if you think your family can't betray you, hold on. My story will redefine betrayal for you. One evening, I got home from work, just hoping to unwind and live my normal life, when I noticed an envelope from a notary. I thought it was some tax paperwork or something like that. But opening it, I realized there were some pleasant surprises waiting for me. Long story short, my own home now belonged to Jake. Yes, my little brother Jake. Honestly, my head spun for a second. How was this even possible? Congratulations, you're homeless. That's about how it sounded. Turns out Jake had forged my signature and transferred the house to himself. Smooth trick, right? Jake has always been a bit of a free spirit. His life's purpose seems to be causing trouble, piling up debt, and somehow manipulating others into rescuing him. But that he would go so far as to take my home? I never could have imagined it, not even in my worst nightmares. He'd signed for me while I was away on a business trip. Then he changed the locks, officially notified me that the house was sold, and claimed I didn't have any right to enter. And this is my brother. Do you think I ran crying to a lawyer? Not exactly. I called him, of course, just to see what could be done. The lawyer, a typical boring Mr. Law, told me with his serious face that I could get my house back. But it would be a long process, a very long one. Legal battles could drag on for months, even years. Meanwhile, Jake was already rubbing his hands, enjoying himself as if life finally had meaning. I was boiling with rage, but guess what? I wasn't about to give up so easily. If Jake thought he could play his little con games with me, I'd play along. But I'd be the one coming out on top. Jake, he's that perfect younger brother who just invites trouble like it's his birthright. If there were awards for pointless schemes, he'd have been nominated ages ago. Constant debts, promises to quit shady dealings, weird schemes that sound like plots from low-budget crime shows. To be honest, I'd always kept my distance from his mess. But every time he got into trouble, our parents would bail him out, and he'd go right back to it, like it was his favorite sport. Once, during one of his final troubles, he even swore it was the last time. Sure, Jake, let's write that down as a binding contract for all to see how you've reformed. Now he managed to not only step on a rake, but pick up my rake, whack me over the head with it, and swipe my house. Yeah, imagine that. This guy thought that as his noble older brother, I'd just say, "Okay, kid, it's just a house, no big deal." Like I'd willingly throw away everything I'd worked for. Naive, right? Especially since the house isn't just a hangout or a crash pad for me. It's my money, my hard work, and basically my life within those walls. And Jake took it as if it were just some expendable asset. We met at a cafe. Honestly, I was hoping for a bit of remorse. Yeah, right. This guy was sitting there looking like some sort of business tycoon who just pulled off the deal of a lifetime. He even ordered the most expensive coffee, pretending to savor his owner status. Did he mention feeling guilty? Not a chance. On the contrary, he calmly assured me he did it for the greater good. You understand, Ben? It's a great opportunity. An investment in a solid asset. You're the one who always said to handle finances wisely. I just stared at him, wondering if he really believed he was fooling anyone. It was like some bizarre play. Then Jake delivered his masterpiece line. You know, you should actually feel relieved since you're no longer tied to the house. It's sort of a liberation for you. And me? Well, let's just say the house suits me. Liberation? He actually thought he'd rescued me, that I should thank him for lifting this burden from my shoulders. Thank you so much, brother, for saving my life. Yeah, that'll happen. I could tell that talking would get me nowhere, so I'd need to take action. We met again, and this time I figured I'd give him one last shot at doing the right thing. Let's keep it civil, I thought. I told Jake, hand over the documents and I'll forget you even tried to pull this stunt. You know, like normal adults. After all, I'm the older brother, trying to do him a favor by keeping this within the family and avoiding scandal. Want to guess his reaction? He just laughed. No, not just laughed. He practically exploded with excitement. Sitting across from me, he said, "You think I didn't plan this through? Ben, I protected the deal legally by the book. Everything's clean. Even if you try to fight it in court, good luck with that." He even hinted that he'd enjoy watching me waste money and nerves on legal fees. I just sat there dumbfounded. My own brother, who should be at least a little grateful for all the past times I bailed him out, was now proudly telling me he'd stolen everything I owned. And he felt no regret, nothing. Emptiness. As if I were some random guy on the street, someone he could use and forget. I was ready to throw in a sarcastic, "Well done, brother, bravo," but held back. Inside, a different plan was forming. I kept my expression calm, pretending to still be willing to give him a chance. But you know what's great about moments like these? When you realize that the whole show is just theater, and you're the director preparing the grand finale. From that point on, I was set. If Jake thought he could play me, I'd make sure those documents wouldn't save him. As we parted ways, he looked like a victor, probably planning how he'd celebrate his new acquisition. Meanwhile, I left determined to act. Once I'd recovered from Jake's magnanimous laughter and his mastermind attitude, I knew I needed a new approach. Just giving up? Not my style. I started exploring options, thinking through ways to reclaim what was mine without disgracing myself in the process. Then it hit me. If I were to play by Jake's own rules, why not make a grand, bold move he'd never see coming? I reached out to friends working with charitable organizations and discovered that, legally, I was still listed as one of the property's owners. This small legal detail opened up a fantastic loophole for me. I could put the house up for a charity auction. Catch the idea? The house stays mine, while the proceeds go to help people in need. And Jake? Jake would be left with, well, nothing. It was the perfect plan. Imagine, he, the champion, trying to profit off someone else's property, suddenly loses his valuable asset, with the money going not to his whims, but to those who truly need it. Beautiful, isn't it? I felt like I was heading toward the ultimate prize for a well-crafted, refined revenge. Of course, I consulted my lawyer first. He was impressed by my creativity and helped iron out a few details to ensure I stayed in control of the process. We sorted out the legalities and filed to proceed with the auction. I found a trusted charity that quickly embraced my idea. Support for those in need, and the house as a prime auction item with strong earning potential? Perfect. So now, with Jake's brilliant plan blown, I was gearing up to become the hero of this story, championing justice by auctioning off what he'd stolen. I spread the word, made an announcement, and envisioned the day that would become Jake's worst memory of the year. Preparing for the auction felt like my own personal mission. It wasn't easy work, and I barely slept, but every little detail felt like a sweet drop of honey in my cup of patience. If you could have seen how much I enjoyed imagining Jake's face when he realized his property was about to go on the auction block, that thought was the best motivation to see this through. I called up everyone I could think of, organizers, journalists, old friends who had experience with events like this. I had to work to get the organizers on board. At first, they couldn't understand why I wanted a grand auction on such short notice, but after a few calls, they agreed it was legal and even amusing. They too were curious about the story behind the lot, a house not just for profit, but for charity. The legend of the good brother who wants to help people had already begun to take on a life of its own. The lawyers prepared the paperwork, local newspapers and media outlets picked up on it. A charity auction always piques interest. I even got a few reporters to write a pre-auction article to build some buzz, a full PR campaign. Each time I imagined Jake's clueless face, my enthusiasm only grew. Meanwhile, Jake kept living as if he were already king of the world, giving orders, moving my stuff, and entertaining himself however he pleased. In his mind, it seemed, my house had already become his new chapter in life, or something like that. You should have seen his smug face on social media, posing as the new owner. Oh, if only he knew that soon it would all be up for sale. On the auction day, the room was packed. Collectors, investors, curious spectators, and everyone who thought this was a great chance to buy a house and support charity at the same time. I stood in the corner of the room, watching the crowd fill up, unable to hide my smirk. Everything was going according to plan. The room was buzzing with people eager to bid on a lot they saw as a gold mine. I stood in the shadows, trying not to laugh aloud. The show was just beginning, and right on cue, Jake walks in. He entered with the air of someone about to sign a billion-dollar deal. Suit, wide grin. He clearly thought he was there to impress everyone with his new acquisition. In his mind, this was his victory lap. He, Jake, the great investor, had come to witness the bidding. And then, when the auctioneer announced the lot and gave the address, oh, it was priceless. Jake froze, his expression one of utter disbelief, as if he'd stumbled into someone else's movie. He obviously couldn't believe his ears. It was like his brain refused to process reality. Pale as a ghost, he stared dumbly at the auctioneer, then at the crowd. And that's when the real show began. At first, Jake tried to approach people, explaining that it's his house, that they can't buy it. He was practically yelling, "Stop the auction! This house is mine!" The auctioneer ignored him completely, continuing with the starting bid. People around him looked at Jake like he was some tourist who'd wandered in, lost and confused. The more he yelled, the more ridiculous he looked. No one believed him, and no one took him seriously, because who would? It looked like a scene from a soap opera, not a serious claim. Meanwhile, the bidding was in full swing. The starting price was announced, and it began climbing, and I stood there, watching the comedy unfold. You should have seen him darting around, trying to stop the proceedings. He tried shouting again that it's his house and that they can't sell it. But he didn't stand a chance. With each new bid, I felt pure satisfaction. The amount kept rising, people were bidding enthusiastically, and Jake looked more and more pitiful with each step. His confidence was crumbling. "This is impossible. No way!" he muttered, like someone watching his plan fall apart right in front of him. Finally, the house sold for an impressive sum. The auctioneer declared the winner, and the room burst into applause. The money went to charity as planned, and Jake, he was left standing there in an empty room, like a beaten dog, broken, defeated, realizing that his clever scheme had just backfired spectacularly. And I, stepping out from the shadows, relished his defeat, knowing this was the best revenge I could have dreamed of. When the auction wrapped up, I was ready to leave the room, feeling like I'd just executed the most satisfying, ironic revenge in our family drama's history. But it wasn't over yet. Just as I turned to go, Jake came rushing up to me, looking like he desperately needed to play Negotiator of the Year. His face no longer held that smug grin he'd been wearing all this time, as if he was master of his life. Instead, he was as pale as if he'd just realized all his brilliant moves had led him to complete ruin. "Ben, look, this is just a misunderstanding. Let's work this out like adults, okay?" His voice trembled, and he was desperately trying to hold on to some shred of pride. I just stood there, listening to his mumbling, trying not to laugh. Like adults? He'd tried to pull the rug out from under me, and now he wanted to talk about fairness? "Are you serious, Jake?" I looked at him, full of disbelief mixed with pure sarcasm. "You stole my house, and now you want me to give you part of the money? That's an odd sense of fairness, don't you think?" But Jake clearly wasn't ready to give up. "Listen, Ben, it was just a mistake. I thought I could help both of us." He tried to squeeze out some excuse. He must have thought if he kept apologizing, I'd feel sorry for him and agree to give him at least some of the money. But here's the thing. I didn't feel even an ounce of pity. Inside, I was cheering to see him in this pathetic state. He tried to sweet-talk me, saying we're family, and that the auction proceeds could be split so he'd have something to start fresh. He even offered to go along with whatever terms I wanted, just so he could keep a bit for himself. I listened to him as if he were proposing a purely hypothetical deal. Something like, "Give me another chance to mess up," and I just chuckled to myself. "Listen, Jake, that money went to charity. The house is no longer our problem, so let's not pretend you have a chance to get anything back," I said with obvious satisfaction, watching his arrogance dissolve. He stood there, pleading with his eyes, but I saw only one thing. Jake had cornered himself. He wanted to have the house, and now he had nothing. No house, No money, no pride. It finally dawned on him that the conversation was over, and he tried to slink away with the look of a man who had just faced the biggest defeat of his life. After everything that happened, Jake seemed to be left in complete emptiness. When it became clear that he wouldn't get any share from the house sale, his last hope crumbled, and he went to our parents. Maybe he figured that was the best thing to do when your plans collapse. Perhaps he thought they'd support him like always, but not this time. My parents knew the whole story, of course. I didn't have to tell them. They heard from others quickly enough, as my charity auction had become a hot topic among our social circle. Jake showed up on their doorstep expecting sympathy, only to be met with looks as if he'd brought a swarm of locusts with him. Imagine thinking you'd get a warm welcome, only to find total disapproval instead. It seemed my parents finally understood the act Jake had been playing all along, and this time they didn't fall for his sad eyes or sweet words about how he just wanted to help everyone. They didn't kick him out, but they weren't eager to take him under their wing either. He ended up exactly where he deserved, on the edge of complete social isolation. Friends? Ha! His so-called friends disappeared the second things got tough. Let's be honest, Jake's friends were the kind of sharks who stuck around as long as he could act like a successful guy. When his world started crumbling, the whole crowd left without a backward glance. Like they'd say themselves, "Who needs dead weight?" Jake was left alone, like Robinson on a deserted island, but without any hope of rescue. And me? I finally felt truly free. This story had weighed on me, but now, seeing that Jake had backed himself into a corner, I felt light. Knowing that greed and betrayal ultimately turn against the betrayer gave me the strength to move forward. I put a firm end to this story, and now it's in the past.